Normandy, June 1944. The morning air was still, heavy with smoke and dew. A Tiger I tank stood hulking on the edge of a hedgerow near Villers-Bocage. Its gray armor shimmered faintly in the sunlight, its barrel trained toward the rolling hills. Inside, the German crew murmured in confidence. They had crushed Shermans before, burned them like paper targets. Through the commander's periscope, he saw them again, a column of M4 Shermans crawling across the open field. "Easy prey," he whispered with a grin. But one of those silhouettes was different. Longer barrel, quiet poise. A faint glint under camouflage netting. A flash tore through the mist. The Tiger's front plate erupted, the impact echoing like thunder. The commander's laughter died in his throat as the great machine shuddered, burning from within. From over 1,000 yards away, a British crew watched in silence, hearts pounding, as their first 17-pounder round struck home. That was the day the Germans stopped laughing at the Sherman. The era of the Iron Giants. When the Second World War erupted across Europe, the tank became the beating heart of modern warfare. It was no longer just a weapon, it was a statement of power, of engineering, of national pride. By 1942, the German Wehrmacht had perfected its armored tactics. Their panzer divisions were swift, disciplined, and devastatingly efficient. The world still remembered the Blitzkrieg of 1940, the way German armor had carved through France like lightning, crushing resistance under tracks of steel. Meanwhile, the Allies sought to catch up. The United States introduced the M4 Sherman, a reliable, mass-produced tank designed for mobility, not duels. It was simple to build, easy to maintain, and could be shipped anywhere in the world. In the deserts of North Africa and the plains of Italy, thousands of Shermans rolled into battle. But as the war evolved, so did the enemy. By late 1942, the Germans unleashed something new, the Tiger I. With its 88mm gun and thick armor, it was almost mythical. Allied shells bounced harmlessly off its sides. Crews described it as a fortress on tracks. The Tiger could destroy a Sherman before the Allied gunner even saw where the shot came from. Reports from the Eastern Front told the same story. Soviet T-34s, once the terror of the Wehrmacht, fell prey to the Tiger and its younger sibling, the Panther. The psychological effect was immense. German tank crews believed they were invincible. Allied crews knew they were outgunned. In North Africa, British and American tankers faced these machines head-on. Their 75mm guns, though reliable, lacked the penetration to harm German heavy armor. Even flank shots sometimes failed. Soldiers nicknamed their own Shermans Ronsons, after the lighter brand, because, as they grimly joked, they light up the first time. To many German commanders, the Sherman was a laughable machine. It was tall, thinly armored, and carried a gun meant for support, not destruction. To face a Tiger in a Sherman was like charging a battleship in a fishing boat. But numbers told another story. Shermans could swarm where Tigers could not. For every Tiger that rolled off German assembly lines, the Allies built 10, sometimes 20 Shermans. Logistics, not armor, became the true weapon of the Western Allies. Yet for the men inside those tanks, numbers meant little comfort when staring down the black muzzle of an 88mm cannon. Still, hope flickered. Engineers in Britain were watching closely. They knew the Sherman could be more, not by changing its body, but by transforming its gun. As reports of shattered Shermans came in from Tunisia and Sicily, British designers at the Royal Ordnance began an audacious plan. Their goal: to mount the formidable 17-pounder anti-tank gun, one of the most powerful Allied weapons of the war, onto the Sherman's small turret. Most said it couldn't be done. The gun was too long, too heavy, too powerful. The recoil alone could tear the turret apart. But necessity breeds invention, and the British were desperate for a solution before the invasion of Europe. In the months that followed, sketches turned to experiments, and experiments to prototypes. Engineers cut into the tank's steel shell, tilted breeches, and shifted radios to make space. It was mechanical surgery, and it worked. The result was something remarkable. A Sherman with the firepower to pierce the armor of a Tiger from over 1,000 yards away. A quiet revolution had begun. hidden beneath camouflage paint and modest British understatement. By early 1944, word spread through Allied ranks of a new Sherman variant. One that didn't run but hunted, building a gun that could change a war. By 1943, Britain faced a brutal truth. The armored war in Europe was not just about courage, it was about firepower. The Germans had mastered both. Their Tigers and Panthers ruled the battlefield. Allied reports described tank engagements where 5 or 6 Shermans were lost for every German heavy tank destroyed. The morale gap was as deep as the technical one. The Royal Ordnance 17-pounder gun, however, offered a glimmer of hope. It was a masterpiece of British engineering. A long-barreled 76.2 mm cannon capable of penetrating even the heaviest armor known to the Wehrmacht. In North Africa, towed versions of the gun had already proven devastating against Tigers when ambushed from cover. But dragging such a weapon into a tank duel was impossible. The solution was obvious, yet nearly impossible to achieve. Mount the 17-pounder inside a tank. But which one? Britain's own tank designs were complex, heavy, and often unreliable. The American Sherman, however, was abundant, dependable, and, most importantly, adaptable. British engineers realized that if they could somehow fit the massive 17-pounder into the Sherman's small turret, they could give Allied tankers a fighting chance. The task fell to a small team led by Lieutenant Colonel George Wytheridge and Major George Brighty. Both were men of ideas, not committees. They worked out of workshops rather than boardrooms, cutting into steel, measuring, improvising. Their first attempts looked ridiculous, a gun far too large for the turret, the breech colliding with the radio compartment. The tank's balance was off. Its recoil nearly destroyed the mountings. But the British had no choice but to make it work. The war wasn't waiting, so they improvised. They turned the gun sideways. They removed the tank's radio from the turret and placed it in a new armored box welded to the rear of the hull. The breech was modified, the recoil shortened, and the gun barrel extended even further. It looked ungainly, but it worked. The result was christened the Sherman Firefly, a name that would soon strike fear into German tank crews across Europe. By early 1944, British workshops were converting hundreds of Shermans into Fireflies. Each conversion took only a few days, fast enough to ready them for the coming invasion of Normandy. Yet secrecy surrounded the project. High command feared the Germans might learn of its capabilities before D-Day. To hide the gun's length, crews painted the last 2 feet of the barrel a dull white, making it appear shorter from a distance. When parked among ordinary Shermans, even trained observers could barely tell the difference. The Germans didn't know that among the hundreds of Shermans soon to land in Normandy, some carried a weapon powerful enough to destroy a Tiger frontally. Training with the Firefly was intense but brief. Crews quickly learned that they could engage targets at over 1,500 yards, a range where normal Shermans were useless. But they also knew they were marked men. Once a Firefly fired, German tankers prioritized it above all others. A single shot could reveal its position, drawing every Tiger and Panther gun in return. Survival demanded precision, stealth, and coordination. As D-Day approached, the British 21st Army Group under General Montgomery ensured that each armored troop would include at least one Firefly. Its role was clear, the killer in the pack. In early June 1944, as ships massed across the English Channel, Fireflies were rolled aboard landing craft under heavy canvas covers. Crews stood beside them, hands resting on the cold steel of a weapon they barely knew, yet trusted completely. One British gunner wrote in his diary the night before the invasion, "Tomorrow we land. If a Tiger comes, we'll see if this bloody thing works." When dawn broke on June 6, 1944, D-Day, the Fireflies landed among the first waves of armored reinforcements. Hidden among ordinary Shermans, they advanced inland across hedgerows and narrow lanes. And within days, German tank crews began to encounter something they couldn't explain. Shermans that didn't die. Shermans that struck back from distances they once thought impossible. By late June, British and Canadian reports confirmed it. Tigers and Panthers were burning, not by airstrikes or artillery, but by the guns of Shermans. The balance had shifted. Quietly, deadly, irreversibly. From that moment, the war of armor was no longer one-sided. And soon, the Germans would learn the Fireflies' name the hard way. Courage inside a steel coffin. For the men inside the Sherman, the world was a shaking, clanging box of steel and fumes. Once the hatches closed, sound dulled and heat rose. The engine roared, the air stank of oil and cordite. Each shell they carried could be the one that saved them, or killed them if it ignited. Tank crews were young, many barely 20. Most had never seen a tiger, but they had heard the stories. Some called them monsters, others the cats. In those days, when Shermans met tigers, survival depended on maneuver, not might. Crews would flank desperately, hoping to hit from the sides or rear. They knew that one mistake, 1 second too slow, meant death. When the Firefly arrived, it gave them something they hadn't had in years. Hope. For the first time, they could fight back on equal terms. The 17-pounder gun could punch through armor that once seemed invincible. The moment that first shell fired, crews felt the difference. The recoil slammed through the turret, the shockwave cracked their teeth, but the enemy fell. It was redemption forged in fire. One gunner later recalled, "We were terrified every time, but when that 17-pounder went off, you felt like you were holding the thunder of God." The heart of the Firefly. The Firefly was, on paper, a strange hybrid, an American chassis mated with British ingenuity. Its profile was awkward, its balance imperfect, its reload slower. But its gun, that long, deadly barrel, changed everything. The 17-pounder was capable of firing several ammunition types, including the APDS, armor-piercing discarding sabot, round. When fired, its tungsten core screamed downrange at nearly 4,000 feet per second. It could penetrate the thick frontal armor of a Tiger I or Panther at over 1,000 yards, sometimes even further. However, the power came at a cost. The Firefly's interior was cramped. Recoil space was minimal. Gunners had to duck aside as the breech slammed back violently. The gun's flash was blinding, revealing the tank's position to every German in sight. To fire meant to risk death in the next 15 seconds. Yet crews learned to live with it. They admired its precision. They learned its rhythm, the way the recoil rocked the hull, the delay before smoke cleared, the exact sound when the shell struck home. In skilled hands, the Firefly became a sniper's weapon, capable of surgical kills across open fields and village streets. While other Shermans provided covering fire or drew attention, the Firefly would wait, motionless, hidden behind hedgerows or walls, until the enemy showed his side. One shot, one kill. The hunter in the pack. The British knew they couldn't risk the Firefly being singled out. It was too valuable, too rare. So they developed a cunning tactic: deception by uniformity. Each troop of 4 tanks included 1 Firefly and 3 standard Shermans. They painted and camouflaged them identically, hiding the Firefly's longer gun with false paint or foliage. To the Germans, every Sherman might be a Firefly, a psychological weapon as much as a physical one. On the battlefield, the Firefly rarely led. It stalked from the rear or flanks, covering its comrades from distance. When a tiger revealed itself, the Firefly's gunner took over, calm, patient, calculating wind and range. German crews, confident in their armor, would pause to fire at the nearest target. That pause was fatal. Reports from Normandy show entire German columns halted after losing just 1 or 2 tanks to unseen Fireflies. The effect was paralyzing. Where once the Germans pressed forward with boldness, now they advanced with fear, scanning every hedgerow for that single long barrel. Even the mere rumor of Fireflies altered German behavior. Orders were issued to engage all Shermans from extreme range and retreat if resistance proved too strong. The hunter's confidence was shaken. By the summer of 1944, the Firefly had earned its name. It struck without warning, vanished into the landscape, and burned bright in the chaos of battle. And soon, the enemy began to realize that the laughter, the old jokes about easy Shermans, had ended. The day the Tigers hesitated. For months, German tank crews had grown used to dominance. Their Tigers and Panthers were feared by all kings of the battlefield. From the steppes of Russia to the fields of France, Allied tanks were targets, not threats. But in the summer of 1944, something changed. In the hedgerows of Normandy, Tiger commanders began reporting strange encounters. Shermans that fired from long range and killed with a single shot. Crews described seeing flashes from impossible distances, then the sickening crack of armor splitting open. At first, German intelligence dismissed these reports. They claimed Allied gunners had simply been lucky, or that hits came from anti-tank guns hidden nearby. But soon the pattern became undeniable. Tank after tank was destroyed by Shermans carrying guns far more powerful than before. By July, the term had spread through German ranks. Falaise, the Firefly. Veteran crews began to fear the sight of a long-barreled Sherman. In some cases, they reversed into battle rather than show their thinner side armor. Tank aces who once advanced boldly now hesitated, peering through optics for that telltale barrel glint. One German officer wrote, "They hide among the normal Shermans. You never know which one will kill you." The psychological tables had turned. From mockery to respect. Before Normandy, many Allied tankers fought under the shadow of fear. They knew their Shermans could not match a Tiger or Panther in raw firepower. Tank battles were often acts of courage or desperation. But with the arrival of the Firefly, that fear shifted. Confidence spread quietly through Allied units. They began to believe again, not recklessly, but resolutely. Crews knew that, if positioned well, they could take on even the best of the Wehrmacht's armor. Firefly crews were treated with a mixture of admiration and unease. Their comrades called them snipers, giant killers, or sometimes suicide tanks, because when a Firefly fired, every enemy gun nearby turned toward its muzzle flash. Survival depended on firing first and moving fast. Many gunners adopted a ritual: one shot, then relocate. They memorized escape routes, reverse gears, and alternate firing positions. They would take the shot, feel the recoil slam through the hull, and instantly pull back before German shells rained down. Despite the danger, the Firefly gave morale a power the Allies had been missing: faith in their own machines. On the German side, the change was equally profound. For years, Tiger and Panther crews had believed themselves untouchable. Now, for the first time, they felt hunted. Confidence turned to caution. Tank engagements that once ended quickly now dragged into duels of nerves and precision. The laughter that once filled German turrets was gone. In its place, silence, focus, and the creeping fear that somewhere out there, a Firefly waited. Changing the battlefield. By mid-1944, the Firefly wasn't just a weapon, it was a tactical revolution. Allied commanders began integrating Fireflies into every armored formation. The ratio was often one Firefly per troop of 4 tanks, but in high-threat zones, such as against German SS Panzer divisions, entire units were re-equipped with them. Their impact was immediate. In Operation Epsom and Operation Goodwood, British and Canadian Fireflies were credited with knocking out Panthers and Tigers at distances the enemy thought safe. Firefly units developed new engagement doctrines. Ambush first, shoot from cover, and use distance as armor. The terrain of Normandy, tight hedgerows, narrow lanes, and rolling hills, played perfectly to the Firefly's strengths. It was not built to charge. It was built to strike. Commanders learned to use it like a hidden sniper, setting up kill zones where advancing German armor would be trapped and exposed. In these engagements, the Firefly's precision became legendary. A skilled gunner could hit a Tiger's weak spot, the turret ring or lower glacis, even through the smoke of battle. When the first shot connected, the rest of the troop opened fire, turning ambushes into rolling infernos. Reports soon circulated through Allied intelligence channels. In Normandy alone, Fireflies accounted for a significant portion of all heavy German tank losses. They had become the equalizer. Even American forces, initially skeptical of British modifications, began requesting Fireflies for their own units. By late 1944, the design had proven so effective that it influenced the next generation of Allied tanks, the British Comet and the early prototypes of the Centurion. But for now, in 1944, amid the mud and fear of northern France, the Firefly had one mission: to clear the path to Germany. And as British and Canadian armor pushed inland, German crews could no longer rely on strength alone. For every tiger that roared into view, a silent Firefly waited in the shadows, watching, calculating, and ready to strike first. Normandy, the first kills. The invasion of Normandy shattered Europe's silence. The beaches were chaos, smoke, fire, and iron filling the horizon. But for the tank crews landing behind the infantry, the real war began inland beyond the sand, among the hedgerows of northern France. This was a battlefield built for ambush. The narrow roads and high earthen banks turned every corner into a trap. For Allied tankers, the first days after D-Day were brutal. German panzers lay in wait, hidden in orchards and tree lines. When the Shermans advanced, the 88mm guns struck first. But amid this chaos, a new sound entered the fight, the thunderous crack of a 17-pounder. On June 13, 1944, near Villers Bocage, one of the war's most dramatic tank clashes unfolded. German SS tank ace Michael Wittmann, commanding a Tiger I, ambushed a column of British armor. In just minutes, he destroyed over a dozen vehicles, Shermans and half-tracks alike. His rampage became legend among German crews and a grim warning to the Allies. But only days later, at the edges of that same region, the tables began to turn. Fireflies were now joining British and Canadian troops in growing numbers. When German Tigers advanced to repeat Wittmann's feats, they found themselves under fire from unseen distances. At Saint-Aignan-de-Crampesnil, during Operation Totalise in August 1944, a single Sherman Firefly of the 1st Northamptonshire Yeomanry waited, concealed behind hedgerows. The gunner, Joe Ekins, spotted a column of German tanks through the morning haze, 3 Tigers of the 101st SS Heavy Panzer Battalion. Ekins steadied his aim, adjusted for range, nearly 800 yards. His first round struck the lead Tiger. Flames burst from its turret. He reloaded, fired again, another Tiger stopped. Within minutes, all 3 were destroyed. One of them, by most accounts, was Wittmann's own tank. For the first time in the war, a Tiger ace, a legend of armored warfare, had fallen to a Sherman. The news rippled through the Allied lines like electricity. The Firefly had proven itself. It wasn't luck, it wasn't chance. It was precision, power, and calm under fire. Fire, breaking the myth. The psychological impact of those early duels was enormous. German units that once charged with impunity now moved cautiously, wary of long-range ambushes. Panzer commanders began ordering reconnaissance before every armored advance. Time lost, momentum broken. For the Allies, every successful Firefly engagement became a symbol. Crews began marking kill rings on their barrels, a quiet defiance against the myth of the Tiger. In one Canadian regiment, a Firefly nicknamed Velikai Lucky destroyed 5 German tanks in a single day. Another, Carroll, became famous for hitting a Panther through a slit barely visible in the mist. A shot so precise that British gunnery instructors later used it in training films. These were not just victories. They were turning points in morale. Every burning Tiger reminded the Allied armies that the tide had turned, that courage and ingenuity could overcome fear and steel. Still, every duel was deadly. The Firefly's muzzle blast revealed its position instantly. German gunners retaliated with fury. Many Fireflies never fired a second shot. But by then, their purpose was already fulfilled. The myth of German invulnerability was gone. World map, a new kind of battle. As Allied forces pushed deeper into Normandy, the fighting became a contest of patience and vision. Fireflies operated like snipers, setting up in concealed positions, tracking German armor through the gaps and hedgerows, waiting for a single clear shot. German Panther crews often fired from extreme distances, 1,500 to 2,000 yards, relying on superior optics. But the 17-pounder's velocity gave the Firefly an equal reach. At those ranges, even the mighty 88mm gun no longer guaranteed supremacy. One British after-action report described a Panther destroyed at 1,200 yards, a direct frontal hit through the gun mantlet. The gunner's comm statement read simply, "Observed strike. Target ceased fire." Behind such understatement lay the revolution of Allied armor warfare. For years, The Allies had relied on numbers and courage to offset technical inferiority. Now, for the first time, they possessed a weapon that could duel the German elite and win. By the end of the Normandy campaign, the Firefly had earned a quiet but devastating reputation. It was not flashy. It did not lead charges or dominate newsreels, but it changed outcomes one shot at a time. And as the Allied front pushed eastward toward Belgium, one truth spread across the battlefields of Europe. The Tiger was no longer the hunter. The Firefly hunts. By midsummer 1944, the hedgerows of Normandy had become a graveyard of steel. Burned-out wrecks of Tigers and Shermans littered the fields, their twisted turrets pointing toward a sky stained with smoke. The once unstoppable German panzer divisions were bleeding dry. Yet even as the Allies gained ground, every mile cost them dearly. The German armor still struck hard, disciplined, precise, unyielding. But among the rows of Allied tanks, something had changed. The men who once whispered in fear of the Tiger now spoke its name with grim confidence. They had the Firefly, Collision Operation Goodwood, the Iron Storm. In July 1944, British forces launched Operation Goodwood, the largest armored assault they had ever attempted in Western Europe. Over 1,000 tanks rolled across open fields east of Caen, a thunderous wave of Allied firepower. Hidden in the villages beyond, German defenders waited. Panthers, Tigers, and 88mm guns dug into the rubble. Within minutes, the open ground turned into a furnace. Dozens of Shermans burned where they stood, columns of smoke spiraling upward like black pillars. But behind the chaos, the Fireflies went to work. They moved methodically, firing from cover, seeking the flash of German muzzles. Each Firefly crew operated like a marksman team, the commander spotting, the gunner holding his breath for that one perfect moment. One British gunner recalled, "We weren't charging them anymore. We were hunting." At Cagny, Fireflies of the 13-18 Royal Hussars knocked out multiple Panthers from over 1,000 yards, their 17-pounder rounds punching clean through frontal armor once thought invincible. A few hours later, the surviving German tanks withdrew. Not destroyed, but broken in will. Goodwood ended without the dramatic breakthrough Montgomery had hoped for, but its message was unmistakable. The British Armored Corps could now meet the Germans head-on and fight as equals. Gear, Operation Totalize, and the Falaise Trap. As summer turned to August, the German front began to collapse. Operation Totalize unleashed a combined assault of infantry, tanks, and air power south of Caen. Fireflies led from the hedgerows again, ambushing retreating German armor as the Allies closed the ring around the Falaise Pocket. The Canadian and Polish armored divisions, fighting side by side, made the Firefly a symbol of persistence. Their tanks advanced through smoke and wreckage, firing at flashes in the dark, at movement between the apple orchards. At St. Lambert-sur-Dives, Canadian Fireflies of the Sherbrooke Fusiliers faced desperate German counterattacks. One by one, Panthers tried to break out of the encirclement. Each time, the 17-pounder roared. When the battle ended, the Canadians had destroyed or disabled nearly a dozen enemy tanks. The road to Paris was open. Falaise was more than a tactical victory. It was the death blow to Germany's armored might in France. The once dominant Panzer Lehr division ceased to exist. The Waffen-SS tank units that survived were shattered shadows of their former power. And scattered across the fields were the husks of Tigers. Their armor blackened, their engines melted, silent proof that the balance of power had shifted forever. Candle, from fear to faith, every Firefly crew carried scars. Many never survived beyond a few missions. But those who did told stories that became legend, stories of calm under pressure, of quiet vengeance for friends lost in earlier battles. One Firefly gunner later said, "You didn't feel brave. You just knew that, at last, we had a fighting chance." Crews gave their tanks names: Belvedere, Velikai Luki, Carol, Ajax. They painted tiny rings on their barrels for every confirmed kill. Each mark was both a triumph and a memorial. The Firefly wasn't perfect. Its tall profile made it an obvious target, and its recoil could stun the crew in confined spaces. Yet, its psychological power outweighed its flaws. German prisoners often reported that they feared the long-barreled Sherman more than any other Allied vehicle. To them, that length meant death from afar. Cross-sword, into the Low Countries. As the Allies swept into Belgium and the Netherlands in the autumn of 1944, Fireflies led armored columns across narrow bridges and cobblestone streets. The landscape changed. No longer hedgerows but canals, windmills, and villages built on water. In Operation Market Garden, British Guards Armored Division Fireflies supported the drive toward Arnhem. Though the operation failed, the tank duels that raged along the Dutch roads again proved the Fireflies' precision. A single British Firefly destroyed 3 Panthers attempting to block the advance. 1 shot each, all within minutes. By winter, Fireflies were everywhere, from the frozen forests of the Ardennes to the outskirts of the Reich. Even American tank units, initially skeptical, began requesting them by name. When the Battle of the Bulge erupted in December 1944, Fireflies of the British XXX Corps engaged the last German heavy tanks thrown into the counteroffensive. Despite snow, fog, and bitter cold, the 17-pounders' range gave them the edge. As one American officer put it after seeing a Firefly knock out a King Tiger, "It's the first time I've seen a Sherman do that and live to tell about it." Checkered flag, the end of the hunt. By the time Allied forces crossed the Rhine in early 1945, the Firefly had become a veteran of every major front in Northwest Europe. The Tigers were no longer gods of the battlefield, just targets. In April, during the final push into Germany, Fireflies of the British 11th Armored Division spearheaded assaults on towns once considered untouchable. German resistance was desperate but fragmented. The last surviving Tigers were hunted down in ambushes, their thick armor now useless against British precision and overwhelming Allied strength. When victory finally came in May 1945, many Firefly crews stood beside their tanks, dented, scarred, but still running, and stared at the ruins of the enemy that once terrified them. They had outlasted the monster. From Normandy's hedgerows to the streets of Hamburg, the Firefly had rewritten the rules of armored warfare. It was the proof that innovation and resolve could turn fear into mastery and change the course of a war. The hunters had become the hunted, and the Sherman Firefly had earned its place among the great weapons that helped end the darkness. The silence after thunder. When the guns of Europe finally fell silent in May 1945, the battlefields told their own story. Across the green fields of France and the forests of Germany lay hundreds of burned-out wrecks, Tigers, Panthers, and Shermans alike. But among the Allied ranks, one machine had gained near-mythical respect, the Sherman Firefly. It had begun as a desperate improvisation. By war's end, it was a legend. In the British 21st Army Group alone, more than 2,000 Fireflies had been fielded. They had fought from the beaches of Normandy to the Elbe River, in rain, snow, and smoke, alongside the men they protected and the infantry who depended on them. For every Tiger destroyed, there was often a Firefly behind the shot. At Villers-Bocage, at St. Lambert, at Buran, at Cagny, its name had become synonymous with the phrase Tiger Killer. Yet for the men who served inside, glory was never the point. The human cost. Every Firefly crew knew their odds. Despite their powerful gun, the Sherman's armor remained thin. A single 88mm hit could ignite the tank, trapping its crew in seconds. Survivors spoke of comrades who vanished in flashes of fire, tank commanders, loaders, gunners who never made it home. In some units, the average lifespan of a Sherman crewman during active combat was measured in weeks, not months. The Firefly's deadliness against the enemy could not erase its vulnerability. Its power came with the same risk every Sherman faced. If spotted first, it rarely survived. That knowledge shaped its crews into cautious, calculating hunters. They fought with discipline, not recklessness. Every battle became a test of nerves: who would see whom first, who would shoot first, who would live another hour. One veteran later reflected, "You didn't feel invincible inside a Firefly. You felt equal. And that was enough." Gear, a weapon of balance. The Firefly didn't end the Tiger's reign through brute strength. It ended it through parity. For the first time since 1941, Allied armor could meet the Germans without immediate fear of destruction. The psychological impact was enormous. Infantry divisions advancing under Firefly cover reported fewer breakdowns in morale. Tank units once hesitant to engage Panthers began to take the initiative. The 17-pounder had not only changed tactics, it had changed confidence. When post-war British analysts reviewed the Normandy campaign, they noted that the Firefly's kill-to-loss ratio against heavy German tanks exceeded any other Allied vehicle. In controlled conditions, it could penetrate even the Tiger II side armor at 1,500 meters, a feat unthinkable for a standard 75mm Sherman. In one report from the Royal Armoured Corps, an officer wrote simply, "The Firefly has restored our faith in the tank." Globe showing Europe-Africa, the end of the Tiger's shadow. The fall of the Third Reich marked not only Germany's defeat, but also the end of the myth of armored invincibility. What began in 1939 with the terrifying roar of Blitzkrieg had ended in 1945 with the quiet certainty of Allied precision. The Tiger, for all its engineering brilliance, had become a victim of its own ambition. Too heavy, too few, too late. The Firefly, in contrast, embodied the Allied philosophy of war: adaptability, mass production, and practical innovation. It was never the best tank on paper, but it was the right tank at the right time. And in the fields where they once clashed, where burned steel still rusted beneath the grass, the laughter of German tank crews that had once echoed through the hedgerows was gone, replaced by the silence of defeat and the respect earned by those who dared to fight back. Legacy of the long barrel. When the dust of war settled, the Sherman Firefly quietly rolled into history. Its final missions ended in the shattered cities of northern Germany, where surrendering Wehrmacht columns lined the roads, their tanks abandoned, their fuel gone. For the British crews, there was no parade, no music, just the eerie calm of peace after years of thunder. They parked their Fireflies in farmyards and fields, engines cooling for the last time. Many of those same tanks would soon be scrapped, victims of a post-war world eager to move on. But the lessons they carried would shape armored warfare for decades to come. Here, the evolution begins. The Firefly had proved a principle that would define post-war tank design. Firepower must always evolve faster than armor. Its 17-pounder gun, once seen as an overpowered experiment, became the benchmark for future British tank armament. Within a few years, the same engineers who built the Firefly developed the 20-pounder. Then the L7 105mm, both direct descendants of that wartime need-to-pierce Tiger armor. Those guns would go on to arm Britain's Centurion tank, the most successful Western tank of the early Cold War, used by dozens of nations worldwide. Even American designers took note. Though the U.S. had initially resisted the British modifications, the performance of the Firefly in combat was undeniable. It directly influenced the post-war push for the M26 Pershing and, later, the M48 Patton, tanks that finally matched firepower with survivability. In a quiet way, the Firefly had bridged eras, from improvisation to the age of modern main battle tanks. Classical build, remembered in steel. Decades later, the Firefly would emerge again, not on battlefields but in museums, documentaries, and memorials. Surviving examples can be found today at Bovington Tank Museum, Normandy's Musée de Blinds, and Canadian War Museums, each one restored with care, its long barrel gleaming under museum lights. Visitors often pause in front of them, drawn not just by the weapon's size, but by what it represents. A weapon built not out of dominance, but necessity. Many Firefly veterans, interviewed in the 1980s and 1990s, spoke with quiet pride, never boasting, always reflective. One commander of the 13th/18th Royal Hussars summarized it best. "We never wanted to destroy. We only wanted to survive long enough to see the end." That was the true spirit of the Firefly, not vengeance but balance. A weapon forged in desperation that became a symbol of determination. Candle, memory, and myth. Over time, the Firefly became a fixture of history books and war films, often overshadowed by the cinematic fame of the Tiger. Yet among historians and soldiers, it holds a different kind of reverence, quieter but deeper. To tank crews, it represented respect earned through fear overcome. To engineers, it was proof that innovation could outthink even the most intimidating enemy. To history itself, it stood as a reminder that technology alone does not decide wars, willpower does. In post-war Britain, where rationing and rebuilding defined daily life, the Firefly became part of a national memory of endurance. Schoolchildren learned about it in the same breath as the Spitfire, different skies, same spirit. Sunrise, the last shot. By the 1950s, most Fireflies were gone. Their steel melted down, their stories fading into history's archives. Yet, a few remain, silent witnesses of a time when courage and craftsmanship met necessity. At the Normandy beaches each June, veterans and historians gather near the preserved Fireflies, their barrels still pointed toward the fields where they once hunted. Flowers rest on their tracks, and the names of crews are read aloud. The laughter that once mocked the Sherman has long since vanished. In its place stands a legacy written in fire, courage, and iron, because when the world needed balance, the Firefly answered. And at 1,000 yards, it made even the mightiest tiger remember that no empire, no machine, and no myth is ever truly invincible. Echoes of steel and smoke. War is a strange teacher. It forces men to invent not out of ambition, but out of fear, and sometimes from that fear greatness emerges. The Sherman Firefly was never designed to be glorious. It was built because soldiers were dying, because the enemy's armor had become a symbol of hopelessness. And yet, through ingenuity and resolve, that hopelessness was turned into power. Every Firefly that rolled across Europe carried with it the spirit of adaptation, of learning faster than the enemy could destroy. Its long barrel wasn't just metal. It was defiance, reaching out across the battlefield, saying, "We will not be outmatched again." The Firefly's story reminds us that history isn't written only by victories, but by the moments when fear is faced and overcome. Its legacy is not in the number of tanks it destroyed, but in the confidence it restored to those who fought in its shadow. Decades later, the roar of its engine has faded, and the thunder of its gun is silent. But its lesson endures, that innovation is born from necessity, and courage is born from loss. In the stillness of post-war Europe, where wildflowers now grow over the wrecks of tigers and Shermans alike, the story of the Firefly lingers, a whisper carried on the wind. It tells us that even in the darkest hours, when laughter turns to silence and giants fall, the spark of determination can change the course of history. The Firefly was more than a tank. It was proof that belief, when forged in the fire of survival, can pierce even the thickest armor.